Welcome back to another episode of Conservation Matters. I'll be your host today. My name is Cassie. I am a technical assistant with the Midland Conservation District. At the district, we strive to get more people educated as well as helping our natural resources. I also help with Women of the Wild, which is getting more women educated into the outdoors, whether it's hunting, fishing, hiking, all of the above. And today, my guest is Katie. Katie, you want to let us know a little about you?
Yeah, my name's Katie Okert, and I'm from Michigan State University Extension. I'm an educator within the Community Food and Environment Institute, and one of my main programming areas is talking about disease in animal and wildlife populations.
Great. So that helps a lot with today, because today our topic is actually going to be talking about chronic wasting disease. And Katie is going to be here to tell us about what chronic wasting disease is, how it's transmitted, what are the signs, chronic wasting disease and where it's located in Michigan counties, stuff like that, that there are baiting regulations and why we have those, what hunters can do to help, and what information and reporting resources there are out there. So what exactly is chronic wasting disease?
So chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a neurodegenerative disease that deer can get, and it's caused by a prion. And a prion is a normal protein. Our bodies produce proteins, animals' bodies produce proteins, and along the line, the protein gets misfolded and misshapen, and then it begins to replicate in the animal's body, and then it affects the nervous system. Prions are especially special because it's not a bacteria, it's not a virus, and it's not a fungus, so traditional vaccines, antibiotics, or antifungals won't cure the animal. So once the animal is infected, it's always a fatal disease.
So did it start out as like a mutation then? Do you know? Are they not sure?
We're really not sure how this prion developed. There's a lot of other prions that animals get. You may be familiar with mad cow disease in cattle, scrapie in sheep and goats, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs in humans. Those are all prion diseases, and it's not really known if they have any relation to one another, if they've mutated along the way. We're really still in infancy of CWD research, so we're learning a lot.
And then what animals do you typically see CWD in?
So CWD only affects cervids, so deer, moose, and elk.
Okay. And then is there, at this time, do you know of any human risks that we would see?
So at this point in time, there's no research that supports that there is a risk to human. However, out of an abundance of caution, because we just don't know, the CDC and the WHO recommend that you don't eat venison from an infected deer. Part of that is because prions in humans take a very long time to incubate, so it's thought that if it was to jump to humans, it would be a 30 to 40 year incubation time. So I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, let alone what I ate 40 years ago. So that's kind of where we're at, but again, we're in that very infancy state of research with CWD.
Right. And then, so say I was deer hunting, what signs would I look for to know if they might have CWD?
Sure. So it's really, really difficult and probably really unlikely that you would see an animal with the end stages of CWD. But if you did, we know that they have a lack of coordination. They salivate and urinate a lot. They drink a lot of water. And one of the key factors is they are very emaciated. So we know this from privately owned cervid farms that have had disease on their farms with end stages. So we know what those symptoms and signs look like. But because it's a neurological disease, they lose their fear of humans, and so likely they're taken by hunters or hit by cars before they get to that end stage in the wild.
That, and they probably are taken advantage of by a lot of other wildlife.
Yes, yes.
And so does it affect them at any age
Yeah.
when they get it?
Yeah, so at any point in time, a deer could, we can talk about deer because that's prevalent here, moose and elk not so much. But yeah, they can contract CWD at any point in time. Those prions, since they're proteins and proteins are occurring in the body, they live in all of the bodily fluids. So birthing fluids are a possible risk for fawns. But the incubation time for the prion in deer is 12 to 24 months. So a deer could have CWD for quite a long time before it started becoming symptomatic.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. That's why testing is really important.
Right. And then where have we seen it in Michigan so far?
So, lots of counties, and they keep growing, unfortunately. But the epicenter is Ionia, Kent, and Montcalm County, which is where I'm based out of. But we've had cases in Clinton, Eaton, Gratiot, Hillsdale, Ingham, Isabella, Jackson, Kent, Midland, Montcalm, and Ogama. So the DNR is really doing a tiered approach through the state to identify if there's deer in other counties that may be carrying CWD. So if you notice since 2021, I believe, the bottom 3 tier counties were tested, then the middle 3, and now we're at the upper 3. And the strategy is we know where the disease is, but we don't know where it might also be.
Where it's spreading.
Yes. So, yeah, and as you look at the maps, you can kind of see where those testing counties are in that tiered approach to the state. So as we move north, as the DNR moves north, they are finding Ogama County had a positive, Midland County had a positive.
Yeah,
so.
they just had one earlier this summer. We
Yep.
had our first positive that we're aware of.
Yep. So, and it could be an individual case, but it could also be that there's a population that's carrying. So.
Right. And then you'd kind of talked a little bit, but how exactly is it transmitted between the deer population?
Yeah, so CWD is really pervasive. It can be spread through both direct contact and indirect contact. So when deer are doing deer things like licking each other, grooming each other, mating, all of those things, there's that ability to directly transfer. But there's also an indirect way that licking branches, bait piles, once the prion is excreted onto the landscape, so into the soil, onto plants, the prion can bind to soil and plants, and it can live there for, we don't know how long, it's thought to be decades. So that's another point where that deer may come across that soil or that plant, ingest it, and become infected. So it's also an environmental contaminant too. So that's why what makes it so pervasive, because pretty much any contact with the environment could be a place of transmission.
Yeah, didn't know it could stay in the dirt.
Yeah.
And I know DNR started to take some precautions to try and help limit the amount of the spread. And as annoyed as people get with it, there are baiting regulations. And those baiting regulations are supposed to help try and shrink the amount of the spread.
Yes. Yeah. So if you think about, I like to relate things to things that we do every day. So if you were at a wedding and you know the bowls of mints on the tables in weddings and everybody has their hands in them, if you think of bait piles like that, we know through lots of research that those mint and peanut bowls carry a lot of pathogen, a lot of bacteria and things like that. The same principles apply to bait piles. And yes, deer are going to eat from the same places, everything like that, but concentrating in one area, feces, your urine, saliva, onto a bait pile really increases the risk of any kind of pathogen transmission, whether it's TB, CWD, any kind of pathogen. it kind of centralizes and localizes that. So that's what makes it a practice that you want to be really cognizant of.
And then could you explain maybe what's the difference between bait and feed? Is there a difference?
There is a difference. From my understanding, bait is a concentrated area. Feed is spread out over a larger area.
Okay. And so bait and feed can still be any kind of thing that they're eating,
Yes,
though?
yes, yep.
Okay. And then there are a lot of different regulations, and baiting and feeding regulations are banned in certain areas. So one of the biggest things that we tell everyone is always refer to the DNR website with your updated on whether or not you're allowed to bait or even feed in your counties. One of the biggest things to always refer back to is that hunting guide. And there is a new one every year, and it's updated every year. But for the most updated most updated information, it's always best to go right to their website. There you can find all the different outlines, whether you qualify for certain criteria. Some areas qualify for different things when it comes to baiting, as well as certain disabilities. They have different rules for those as well. So always refer to your DNR website or your hunting guide. Again, those are new every single year. They update those. And then, like it also says, we do have some baiting is allowed still in certain areas. But that information, again, the best way to figure out if it is prevalent for you is making sure you're checking your DNR website, your hunting guides. You'll hear us say that a lot.
Yes.
Hunting guide, that's a very important thing to go on. In certain areas, they also allow for supplemental feeding, but only at certain times and certain months. So that doesn't qualify in the Lower Peninsula. So if you are, whether you're actually living in the Upper Peninsula or maybe you just hunt up there, that's another thing to remember as well, as your hunting area might be different than your living address. So make sure that you're following the rules where you are physically hunting. And another question that we get often is, yes, maybe I'm not trying to feed them or bait them for hunting purposes, but maybe I just like seeing the wildlife. And there are still rules that apply for that, again, for helping limit the spread of this illness, as well as other sicknesses, and trying to also separate the wildlife from people. You have to give that barrier. Yes, they're cool to look at, but they can still be dangerous. They are a wild animal, even though they look cute.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And like any animal population, there's a plethora of diseases that animals or that deer may have that could transmit to people, to other animals. Bovine tuberculosis is a perfect example of that. So that's transmissible to both humans and to cattle. So it's one of those pretty potent zoonotic diseases.
Yeah, and we do know that some of the other things were, while there's recreational feeding, there's also people come up with the question of, can I feed my birds and other wildlife? And once again, there are some outlines on what consists of bird feeding and other wildlife. And with bird feeding, they do stress that you're using actual bird feeders. Deer can get into bird feeders. We've seen squirrels do it. So making sure you know what kind of feeders you should be using. That way you don't get in trouble with the DNR. They could come out and ask you and say, hey, this is kind of against our regulations, and so they would most likely give you a warning and refer to you to go to their DNR website to learn more about it, to make sure you are doing it. So if you have any kind of questions that have to do with that, always go to that.
And always, if you have questions, contact your local biologist. They can answer lots of questions. And with deer feeder or with bird feeders in particular, we know that birds come to them, deer come to them. It's also really important to keep those feeders clean and sanitized, because we have high pathogen avian influenza that's a threat to both our wild bird and our domestic bird populations too. So there's a lot of different biosecurity things that you can do to help minimize the spread of all kinds of diseases.
See, that's a good point. It's not just, today we might be talking about CWD, but that is not the only sickness that's out there. And not even just for deer, that's not the only sickness. So just like thinking about yourself, cleaning up after things, washing your hands, stuff like that, it's the same thing we have to do with the wildlife stuff. If you're going to be bringing them into your yard, make sure you are cleaning the things that they are using to help not only spreading it to yourself, but also to other wildlife. And a big question that a lot of people would probably have is, what can you do?
So there's movement regulations. So right now, if you live in Montcalm County in its entirety, and then the top tier counties in Ione County, or townships in Ione County, and a couple of the south or northeastern townships in Kent County, there's movement restrictions because there's such a high concentration of CWD there. We want to contain it. So the DNR has movement restrictions that you can't take deer outside of that area. But so always look at that Hunter Digest about what movement requirements there are or regulations. Having your deer tested, if you're in an area with known CWD, I would really encourage you to test that deer before you consume it, just to be sure, out of an abundance of caution. Also, if you're in the counties that the DNR is focusing on for surveillance, make sure to turn your heads in or extract your lymph nodes, because that really helps the DNR identify and have a good sample size to make sure that the deer population is healthy in that particular area.
So you brought up deer testing, and I know that DNR and MSU have actually sent out deer test kits that you can do at home. I know you brought a couple today.
Yeah.
If you wanted to show and then kind of give a list of what's in those and like how one would use that to know.
Yeah. So this is the DNR CWD testing kit. In a lot of counties, this is free, and they're distributed at the conservation district in that county. In Montcalm and Ionia, they're also at the extension offices because I'm there. But it's a free testing kit, and it's super easy. There's printed off directions that are in every envelope. There's also a video online. If you go to extension.msu.edu/deer and go to the CWD testing tab, there's a video showing you how to extract those retropharyngeal lymph nodes. So the lymph nodes that are right here under the chin, deer have one similar, and those are the ones specifically for CWD testing. So every kit has a thermo bag, a cold pack, because it's really important that those samples stay cold, and then enough bags for 3 samples. And you'll always want to, if you're going to test, you've got to go online, order your test. It's free, you just have to do it. So you print off your order confirmation sheet, and I always say, write on the inside bag your order number and your last name. That way samples don't get mixed up and everything. And then you double bag them. You can throw lymph nodes in your freezer and keep them. If you're planning on going out and hunting some more, you can send up to 3 tests or 3 samples per testing kit. So it's super easy, and it's something that I would really recommend that you do if you are in a CWD area. So that's the DNR testing kit, and then you just pop it in the mail. It's a UPS next day air right to the diagnostic lab in East Lansing, so super easy. Then MSU Extension, I got a grant from APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Division of the federal government, to help do CWD outreach and education in Michigan. And one of the things that I like to do when I educate people about any kind of disease is we can't control what wildlife do right? If it was domesticated animals, we could isolate them, we could treat them. Wildlife is a completely different story. So it becomes our responsibility as humans to do what we can to not transmit disease into other places. And what I found through several years of doing outreach and education about CWD is if you give people the tools, they're more likely to adopt those habits, right? And those practices, because 10 years ago, if I was to tell you, oh, you should wear disposable gloves while you're field dressing your deer or handling your legally harvested deer, you probably would have looked at me like, really? So that's one of the best practices that we can do as people to protect not only ourselves from whatever diseases deer may carry, but it's also a good way to not spread CWD to prion around the environment, because you just throw away those gloves in a landfill as soon as you're done. And so I made these kits that have a Michigan Venison Guide, which is a really handy little book that has some best practices for field dressing, some recipes, some instructions on how to home process your deer. Then a rat card about CWD with practices that you can implement to help slow the spread. And then just some general things, brown paper towel, because you never want to take white paper towel out to the woods, right? Because you might get mistaken for a deer by another hunter. Rubber gloves, or the nitrile gloves, because we want to encourage people to use gloves while they're handling their deer. And then also Clorox disinfecting wipes. It's really important, just as a normal practice, to wipe down and disinfect your tools, whether that's your knives, hooks, things like that that are hard surfaces that you can just quickly wipe down with a sanitizing wipe, and that just helps lessen the exposure to potential diseases. So these are available at your office.
Yep, at the Midland Conservation District. And I know that some people have asked me the question, so say they mail these in, do they get a confirmation whether or not they tested positive, negative, no matter what, or only if they test positive do they reach out?
So the diagnostic lab, what the protocol is if you have a positive deer, they will call you. And then they'll talk about options of what to do with that deer and options for where you may have harvested that deer if it's your private property. If you want to check on the status of your test and you haven't heard, you can go online and you just type in your, I believe it's your license number, and then the status of your test will pop up. It generally takes about 2 weeks for a test to be run. So if you send your test kit in, wait about 2 weeks, and then you can go on the website to see what the status is. But if you do have a positive deer, the DNR will call you.
So no call is good.
Yes, no news is good news.
And then you said that you had a little bit of, those are some of the suggestions for things to bring into the field.
Yeah.
Were there any other kind of things that you can think of that are always a good practice to bring into the field with you?
Yeah, so the one thing that I missed is contractor-based garbage bags, the really thick, heavy black garbage bags. It's a really good idea to anything that you are not using off your deer, to throw those in one of the non-porous contractor garbage bags and then put them in a landfill. If you're field dressing your deer out in the woods, it's a really good practice to go ahead and bury those inside parts, at least 2 feet down, so that other predators aren't digging them up and taking them around. And because the whole point is we don't want to spread prion into the environment. So disposing of those, we personally, when my family hunts, we dispose of everything in the landfill just by bringing the whole deer up and then field dressing it into a garbage bag and throwing that away, just because we want to be extra cautious. Yep. But you know, it's always whenever you're going hunting, whether you're in a CWD area or not, you always want to have your license, a knife, a hatchet, some string, zip ties, brown paper towel, rubber gloves. Some of those things come in real handy if you're out hunting and you harvest a deer.
Those are good to know. So if someone had more questions and maybe they wanted to ask you or MSU, what is the best way to get some more resource information or get in touch with one of you guys?
Sure. So we've got a really robust website that has a lot of information about testing, a lot of information about CWD, but it also has videos about the research that's happening both at Michigan State University and across the country that researchers are working on to help us learn more about CWD. There's some really nice videos about those research projects, and you can get to that site by going to extension.msu.edu/deer. And you can always email me at okertka@msu.edu. You can people search me, I think, and it'll come right up. So yeah, email is the best way to get a hold of me because I'm always out on the road and talking to people, and phone is kind of hard.
Yeah. And then another resource that is always a good one to use is your DNR. You can get a hold of them by email, or you can call them. They have the Wildlife Disease Laboratory. That's always a good one. If you shoot a deer or see a sick deer, and you see a deer that just looks like something's off, it's always good to just report it. Give them signs, let them know a general area so that they can look in those areas to try and help see if, well, maybe that deer was just sick from, it had a wound and it spread into it or anything like that. Sometimes when you see a sick deer, it's just a sick deer, just like all other wildlife. But if you have any kind of concerns or even just think maybe, it's always best to just reach out to DNR or to that Wildlife Disease Laboratory and give them that information so that they can go and see if it is something for a larger concern or not. And then another thing we wanted to let you know is that the Midland Conservation District, we do have these testing kits. You can visit us. We're open from 8 a.m. to 4:30, Monday through Friday. We also do have a way that you can get those testing kits even if our business hours aren't open. So if you have any questions or just want to know more information, you can always feel free to give us a call. You'll most likely be speaking to Karen. She's great, and she'll be able to answer any kind of questions that you might have about it. And other than that, we're always here, always happy to help answer your further questions. And we just want to say thanks for joining myself and Katie. Katie, thanks for coming out here and explaining to everyone what CWD is and how we can go about identifying it and also trying to minimize the spread of it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great.